Oh, okay. Yeah, Zainab is not far.
Yeah, no, it's true. That's really good. Okay, fantastic. Or just leave it, either way.
Is it easy? Yeah, you can remove it. Okay. This way,
If it's easy, otherwise just leave it. Because we have the
I
card.
haven't looked easy.
Hey, good to see you. How are you doing? Yeah.
Hey, my friend.
Get ready, Sonia. Gonna make
It's what?
an annoying noise.
Good to see you.
I just want to make sure I'm not.
Oh, yeah, we got. No. I know. I remember you said that. I know what's coming.
Okay. It didn't make any noise.
Usually it does.
Now we can space them out. Oh, no. I see it's already in there. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
Thank you.
You are welcome. You're Ebenezer.
Yes, ma'am.
I didn't sit. I don't know where
This
you
is
guys
me.
want to sit. I know, but
This is fine.
you're fine?
Yeah, thanks, man. Appreciate it. Hey, how you doing? Ebenezer. Ebenezer, nice to meet you, sir. Oh, yeah, I think I remember. I enjoy your letters. Memos. Oh, thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Taking all known positions, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Okay, thanks. I drove him away. Yeah, he's still in DC. Actually, I'm meeting him on Friday, so we see each other like almost every week. Yeah, he's doing okay. Yeah, I know. Yeah, he's been extremely careful, and it looks good. Yeah. Actually, I have an in-person event at the council on Tuesday, on Monday, and he's going to be there. I didn't come prepared to say anything, so let's see if I.
Well, it'll work out fine.
Yeah, we'll have too many questions. Don't worry.
We'll have a lot of questions. I mean, any one of us could just speak.
You can say it. You can just say this thing for like 10 minutes and then.
Yeah.
Ask people to. And remember to tell them that I called it.
Right.
And that you were wrong and I was right.
I will tell them that.
And I said to say so modestly.
And in fact, Chi also called it. And so I'm the sole forecaster who got it wrong.
No, you're not the only one.
Oh.
I
I have
the outlier.
plenty of company. Plenty of company. We'll start in about 5 minutes or so. Did you see Chris? Chris Merriman?
Yeah.
Okay. Julia?
It's 1 o'clock.
So I don't have off the top of my head the balance of the party results at the states.
12 states each. That's what they want.
Wow.
Tinubu only got it over the line, as I imagine the world, because of his alliance with the Northern Power holders. Yeah. If Obi had done that, or if the PDP hadn't fractured, we'll be talking about President Abubakar right now, with Obi as VP. The 2019 ticket.
Right. That's right. Yeah, who knows what the PDP is now?
It has at least 4 tendencies. There's a Labour PDP thing where we still don't know who is going to prevail. Because the Labour itself is a shell that's basically taken over by emigres from PDP. So we don't know if that will become the eventual Labour or if the ordinary spirit of Labour will prevail in that arrangement.
Right.
There's still so much, that's still. My sense is that we'll see the end of Atiku as a force. Unless he pulls a Buhari in 4 years, 80 years old, I don't see it. Do you?
I don't see how that happens.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think we've seen the last of Obi.
No. Oh. It's just starting.
Yeah.
It depends on how he plays his hand next. You go and sit down. Okay, we won't fight now. The fight is coming up now. I'm not ready.
Okay.
Who's going to sit down?
We track militant movements around the world.
Okay.
I post on every.
Hey, how are you? Good to see you. Yeah. Looking well.
You're looking good. You're looking great.
Yeah.
It's back again.
Right.
How you doing?
I did the
Sure.
whole series.
Great.
I've done a whole series and I have another one being edited about the militias in the eastern DRC.
Oh, excellent, excellent. So I'll look forward to seeing that. Just send me that.
Yeah, one's a breakdown of ADF, one is on Cadecno, and
Uh-huh.
another one is on M23.
We need that.
Sent it to the State Department as well.
Excellent, excellent.
And I also did one in January about the Nigerian elections where I was focusing on the attacks on INEC.
No, I didn't come prepared to say. Did you see my email? No. I'm just waiting for questions.
There's no slides.
No.
There's none at all?
No.
Okay, so she can bring that up.
Right.
Yeah. It's the wide west.
Okay, I'm gonna get this. I'm gonna get this show
Yeah.
on the road.
It's really a wide, wide west for me.
You know, it's the first time I'm seeing you. No, seriously. I'm just noticing now.
In person, though.
Yeah.
Because
So you
I
have
feel like
to. The
I've seen
tradition in Yoruba land is you then have to give me money. We'll talk about it. You can negotiate. This is 419.
all the chief priests there. Your wire is too much.
Turn it off.
Oh, good.
It's
Just turn it off from there, or just do this?
From here.
Oh, from here?
Both of
Should
them.
I get you a drink?
no. Let me go.
Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, welcome everybody. Glad to see you all here this afternoon, and we're looking forward to a informative and spirited. Sorry.
Move the mic over some.
Okay, we're looking forward to an informative and spirited conversation about Nigeria's recent general and state elections. I'm Peter Lewis, faculty lead for African Studies at SAIS, and I'm joined today by Ebenezer Obadare, the Douglas Dillon Senior Fellow for African Studies, and Professor Chiedo Nwankwor, who will be joining us momentarily, who is Vice Dean for Academic Affairs at SAIS. Folks are welcome to sit up front. We all brushed our teeth this morning. We're really quite presentable.
Most of us.
Most of us. But that's also comfortable seating where you are. So, and our voices carry, so that's fine. So we're going to probably take about 12 minutes each to make comments, and then we'll have some follow-up and some back and some Q&A, and we'll have I think a good general exchange. So let me just set the scene for a couple of minutes. Nigeria's recent elections for president and National Assembly legislature, which held on February 25th, and the state offices for 28 states on March 18th. This marked the 7th election cycle since the transition from military rule in 1999. And that in itself should be noted. The longevity of electoral government can be appreciated in Nigeria. Certainly, many Nigerians, many observers in 1999, many of us in the room who have been following events there for a long time, would not have anticipated that we'd be getting through a 7th electoral cycle and that the elections would proceed in a reasonably orderly and routine manner. And I use that qualification quite deliberately, and we'll have more to say about that. But many issues of governance and leadership obviously are very much on our minds and are very much in the foreground as well. President Muhammadu Buhari is completing his 2nd and final constitutional term as president. His party, the All Progressives Congress, nominated former governor of Lagos, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, as presidential candidate. The main opposition, People's Democratic Party, which had been the governing party from 1999 to 2015, nominated former Vice President Atiku Abubakar, who is a perennial candidate. I believe this was his sixth effort and sixth run at the presidency. So he's tenacious, if nothing else. The small and in the national context, minor party, the Labor Party, fielded a candidate as well, Peter Obi, former governor of Anambra under the APGA party, then moving to PDP and then to Labor. So his position in the firmament is sometimes a little bit difficult to check, but what was significant and really dramatic about this cycle was that Obi's campaign really gained momentum. It was more than just a symbolic protest campaign, as we have seen so many times in the case of third parties or minor parties in Nigeria. It was a campaign which garnered a lot of enthusiasm on the streets, a lot of visible affiliation and visible interest, especially from younger Nigerians, and in a series of pre-election polls, some of which were quite well sampled and quite well managed, Obi seemed to have a significant advantage even in a first round in terms of the plurality of the vote. In others, the results were less certain. So it was ambiguous, but it was by no means a foregone conclusion that Obi was just a minor candidate. In fact, it became a three-way race, and it was recognized as such by almost everyone. And so this was something of an indicator of dissatisfaction and turbulence and volatility within the political terrain. Where did this come from? Well, I think most people would point to the performance of the last two presidential or last three presidential terms, and particularly a number of issues since 2015 when President Buhari was elected. Currently, we're in the midst of the second recession during that presidential administration. The first coming in 2015, 2016, the second more recently on the heels of both COVID and volatility in fuel prices and so forth. So we've had rolling recessions, we can say, and perhaps more importantly, a crisis, some people would say even a collapse of internal security, as insurgencies, local sectional battles or contention, and widespread, now endemic criminality have really created fundamental challenges to personal security and national stability across the country. And so people are looking at the security situation and certainly citing it in public opinion polls. They're looking at the economic situation, same there, and they're finding, in general, the political establishment is wanting. We've seen other indications of this in the End SARS movement, which was a protest against police brutality and government abuses, which led to some fatal shootings in Lagos in 2019. And this is a kind of symbol or harbinger or just a manifestation of a widespread youth movement for improved governance and against the current status quo. And that can take a lot of different directions with different groups and constituencies, but clearly the youth voice and the youth constituency is searching for an outlet, and certainly it was evident that they found one, some segment found one in this case. So against this background of poor democratic performance or poor government performance and rolling national challenges and crises, we see a very pessimistic and downbeat popular mood. In recent surveys from the Afrobarometer Network, which has been the most consistent and regular tracking of the public mood since the transition to democracy, we found that 89% of Nigerians said the country was headed in the wrong direction. That's the highest number and the biggest spread in the kind of right direction, wrong direction question that has ever been recorded since the first survey was published in 2020. By the same token, the most recent Afrobarometer survey, which was a pre-election survey that was in 2022 and held prior to Obi's candidacy, so we didn't ask about presidential candidates per se, but other broad questions about affiliation and national preferences and national mood. We saw all-time lows for presidential performance. The presidential performance rating was below 25%. Trust in the presidency, also an all-time low, under 20%. And satisfaction with democracy, which alarmingly was also at a recorded low in 2022. However, the answer about presidential democracy should be immediately qualified and offset by the answers about preferences for democracy and preferences for elections. Nigerians are clearly deeply dissatisfied by the performance of the political establishment. They're deeply pessimistic about the direction of the country right now. At the same time, they're holding steady in well over 70% who express an unqualified preference for democracy as the best system for the country in all circumstances. That has not budged. And at the same time, more than 2/3 of Nigerians affirm a preference for elections as the best way to choose their leaders. That has not budged. So the takeaway here is pretty basic and pretty simple. There's a commitment to democracy, there's democratic aspirations which are widespread by a large majority among the Nigerian public, and there's deep disappointment and dissatisfaction with the way democracy is actually working. Also, which was an interesting setting question from Afrobarometer, we saw the lowest recorded affiliation with political parties. In other words, the Afrobarometer for many cycles has asked Nigerians, do you feel close to a political party? In the pivotal 2015 election, which elected Muhammadu Buhari, overturned the PDP dominance in the political process. It was a big change election. I think 75% of Nigerians said, yes, I feel close to a political party. And more than two-thirds of them, about 70%, said, I feel close to either the APC, which was the opposition party at the time, or the PDP. So there was very strong, definite political affiliation, and the political affiliation was with the dominant political establishment. This time, that just collapsed. Only about 1/3 of Nigerians overall said that they felt any affiliation or affinity with a political party. And it was even lower when you separated out the youth vote. So it was pretty clear that Nigerians were dissatisfied, they were looking for some kind of alternative, and they were not finding it in the political mainstream. And of course, we saw that play out with this new three-way competitive race in the political profile, the political terrain. But of course, there are a couple of questions about this. One is whether these dissatisfied voters, and particularly youth, would turn out. Second, would there be elections that were credible and fair and properly administered? Third, did Obi have a path to victory given the regional alignments in Nigerian politics, with a northern constituency pretty much voicing adamant rejection of Obi's candidacy, the Southwest veering much more closely toward their their indigene Tinubu, and some other regions expressing a sympathy for Obi. That was the question going in. I'm not going to answer those questions for you because I have two very able colleagues with me, including Professor Nwankwor, who was a witness to the elections in Nigeria during the presidential cycle, and they will offer their observations and analysis. So I'll turn the floor over to Professor Nwankwor, and then Professor Obadare will follow up.
Thank you, Peter. Hi, everyone. All right, so I'm not sure what Peter wants me to say because clearly he's outlined the issues, the challenges, the prospects for Nigerian democracy, and I don't think anybody would have put it better than Peter did. However, some of the more interesting questions for me going into and post-election. As you can imagine, as some of us have discussed previously, issues around Obi's candidature, right? The obedient movement, as we term it, because that has in fundamental ways reshaped what we know as Nigerian elections, right? Democracy. I mean, Ribadu did try that in 2011, but not to this extent, right? So what we see here now is more of a multi-party democracy, right? Where what we've typically had has been a two-party democracy in Nigeria. So some of the issues that Peter has outlined, right? One is, giving this context, what do we expect for Nigerian democracy, right? What do we expect for the fault lines, which typically has bedeviled Nigerian democracy, right? It's all been about the fault lines, which, as we know, dates back to the Civil War, and even perhaps before then. Third, what's the prospect for Nigerian democracy, given the role the youth played, right? Not just the youth, but also some of these voices that have typically occupied the margins of democracy in Nigeria, but this time it seems as though they, in significant ways, reshaped, right, the outcomes of the election. And then four, what does this mean for state capacity? Because these really are the fundamental issues about Nigerian democracy, about governance, about how governance shapes the lives of people, which are the substantive issues, right? When we talk about democracy, I don't think any of us are interested in democracy in the abstract form of democracy and the philosophies around democracy, whether it's substantive or regulative or all of that. We're all interested in how does democracy shape life's outcomes for people in Nigeria, right? For real life people. And I think these are some of the questions. And so going back, some of the conversations we had, the main issues were, can Obi win the election? If Obi was going to win the election, it will mean we were making some fundamental assumptions. One is that there's going to have to be a voting across the fault lines, across the religious and regional fault lines, which typically have not happened in Nigeria, right? There are some of those voting, but the reason that the North has retained power all this while is precisely because of this, right? The ratios of populations and democracy has always been a game of numbers, and the North has had the number. And the North has also had the capacity because of that to align with the West. And so this is where we've had the results in terms of leadership that we've had in Nigeria across. But when this movement started and it gathered heat, the question became, can this can the Obi movement, deliver a win for Nigeria that's outside of the negotiated pacts, right, that has typically produced leadership outcomes in Nigeria? And so I answered that question, if you all remember, and I said that Obi is not going to win. Against, of course, what one would think, because I am from the same area as Obi. But we did look at, we looked at what Tinubu did, right, is in the alliances that, in as much as democracy is a game of numbers, in Nigeria, it's also a game of structure. It's also a game of alliances. And Obi did not, establish the alliances that we were expecting that he would establish, right? So the conversation continued on the imaginary, right? The national consciousness that's out in social media. And across the world, I don't think we've seen any significant change, translating that consciousness to real votes and victories. I mean, we saw what happened in the Arab Spring, and we've seen the walk back of that. And that's one. Secondly, shoot. I said shoot.
We heard that.
And so now that the election is over, I think I'll leave the other part of it for Obadare. Now that the election is over, the question we're asking is, where do we go from here? And I think that's really the question we should be asking. What does the obedience movement mean for Nigerian democracy going forward? The moves, the negotiations that we're expecting that the Labour Party will make, right, for a sustained multi-party democracy in Nigeria, are they making those? Or are we going to see a regression, a situation where we have a reversion back to a two-dominant party situation, right? So those, that in fact, for me and for my constituency, that's the principal question at this point, because the election has been won. I don't think anybody is expecting to see an activist judiciary in Nigeria anytime soon, right? At least I don't think there's going to be a result, an outcome, right, of the suits that's going to change the situation as is. So what's the prospects moving forward? Certainly not for PDP. We don't expect any changes from PDP. But what's the prospect for Labour Party? Is Labour Party going to be the opposition that we've been looking for in Nigerian democracy before now? Or is it going to become another status quo in terms of, party and electoral movements in Nigeria?
Great, thank you. I think at this point I should also point out, Ebenezer reminded me this, that both of my colleagues on either side called the election prior to the polling, and I was one of the sort of hedging voices, like, I don't know, looking at the polls, there might be a path to victory, and both colleagues said, no, it's going to be a first round victory, probably for Tinubu, and that's how it played out. So I'll just say, in terms of forecasting, don't ever bet based on my...
We won't.
Ebenezer.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to start on that note by saying that all along I've been a minority in terms of my reading of the Nigerian political process, my prediction of what I thought might happen, and my own assessment of what I think we should expect in the foreseeable future. So keep that in mind as I say like some of the things that I'm going to say right now. The first point is that I think it's important to think historically, and that we avoid seeing this election in isolation. There's always that danger when people think about an election, they think only about the election. But I'm going to encourage us not to do that, but to place it within the general context of Nigerian history and the history of the democratic process since 1999. The worst time to think about any election is right after the election. You're better off waiting 6 months, a year, 2 years, and then the look back always gives you a different perspective. And I suspect that when we do the same thing with this particular election, a different profile of the election is going to present itself to us. The other thing is, with respect to this particular election, my sister just mentioned, a part of this, is that it's important to keep in mind the concrete circumstances in which it took place. Given the prevailing circumstances, it's a miracle that we had an election at all, right? People should not have come out. There should have been riots on the street. People had no money. People had no gas. There was no electricity. I mean, the situation in the country has been absolutely, scandalous for the last 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks. And to think that we actually conducted an election and we had the level of success that I think we had, I think it's important to keep that in mind. And it's important to say that because, again, when you think about particular elections, you don't just say, okay, 1999 election, 2003 election, 2000, but to think about the circumstances under which particular elections took place. That makes comparison, all the more, it sort of put a wrinkle on the fabric, if I may put it like that. So just to complement what the previous speakers have said, I'm just going to speak in general about who I consider or what I consider to be the winners and the losers of the election. It's not what you think, so hear me out. So obviously the winner of the election is Tinubu, but it's one of those victories where you think another victory like that, right? He emerged badly wounded, right? His reputation took a beating. He lost his political fiefdom. If you had told me before the election, even though I called it for Tinubu, I thought he was going to win. Never in my imagination, never did I think he was going to lose Lagos. And I think people are not just paying attention to that. It's one of the most remarkable things that happened. If I was going to throw an election, I would not throw Lagos State, a state that is technically, symbolically, politically very important to me, and one over which I've exercised absolute suzerainty since the return to democracy in 1999. I think it's a big thing. And even though Tinubu won, it's one of those victories where you think, you know what, I don't want another victory like that. Another winner of the election, believe it or not, Peter Obi, for helping us answer the question as one, to the viability of a third-party candidacy, for breaking up the PDP, thus more or less ending the duopoly that has been in place since 1999. And in the process, for injecting life into the political process by harnessing the energy of young people within and outside the country. In this specific sense, please underline that, in the sense in which I'm speaking, not only did he not lose, as a matter of fact, he overperformed. If you look at the handicaps that he faced, you would not have imagined that Obi will win Plateau State, right? I think he won Nasarawa State. He beat Tinubu in Lagos State. He performed handily in so many other states where, ordinarily you would not have expected him, to perform well. In that sense, Obi was also a winner in this election. Another winner, civil society, organized primarily around the obedient, but vitalized by and drawing on NSAS, labor, or what's left of it, the student body, or also, what's left of it. The political process, too, when you think about it the way I'm thinking about it, it faced its most severe test and appears to have survived thus far. But most important, once you look below the presidential level, you see such tremendous progress. As I'm speaking to you, in Adamawa State, one of the most conservative parts of Nigeria, there is a two-person tussle between the APC candidate, who is a woman, and the other candidate, the candidate of the PDP. And from what I gather, the APC candidate, the woman, was on her way to actually winning until some people did some hanky-panky. INEC is yet to resolve the situation. My bet is still on the woman winning, depending on the kind of ostrich that goes on. I'm using that as an example of some of the most significant things that took place once you look below the presidential level. And I'm going to encourage people to do that. And it's one of the reasons I'm saying, look at this election again. It's not the scandal that many people think it is. And I'm saying that because I was there in June 1993. I was on the streets of Lagos when Abacha shot 400 people. No, this is not close to it, right? It has its problems, but this is not that kind of election. For the first time, there's a 25-year-old guy from one of the northern states who's going to be in the parliament. In so many parts of the country, young women, young men have joined the houses of assembly, they're joining the House of Representatives. There's a lot that is going on below the presidential level that bodes well for democracy and democratic consolidation in Nigeria. And if we are fixated only on what's happening at the top of the ticket, top of the ballot, we're going to miss that. Believe it or not, INEC was a winner of this election. I know that's a very controversial thing to say, but hear me out. It prevailed more or less in the context of institutional dysfunction. Look, no single institution in Nigeria works. We all know that, right? You don't even, your marriage license cannot be procured without, paying somebody to do it. The police doesn't work. The army does not work. If you go to any government office after 9 a.m., nobody. If you go after 3 p.m., nobody. You all know what I'm talking about if you study Nigeria, if you come from Nigeria, or if you visited Nigeria. In that context of institutional morass, everybody expects INEC to be spick and span, to have no mistakes. In a country where there is no electricity, everybody expects everything to work well on time. I am not making brief for INEC. I'm asking you, don't look at INEC in isolation. Put INEC in the context of the institutional matrix in Nigeria, and the picture begins to change. I know many people would disagree with that. As I say, I've been a minority in some of the positions I've taken on along. I'm comfortable in that position, and I have every confidence that in the matter of time, I'll be proven right. Now, who are the losers? Atiku, clearly. It's probably the end of the road for him is 76, but Biden is 80. So maybe, just maybe, there is hope for Atiku. Biden is 80, is going to be 82 in 2 years, and he's still planning to run. If he does make a second time, it will be 86 by the end of the second term. So maybe Atiku is looking at Biden and saying, hey, I'm still a spring chicken compared with Biden. So you never know. But my sense is that it's done. I don't think he has a way back. And my sense is that he might also cut a deal with Tinubu at some point. So that's waiting to be seen. The other loser, ethnic relations, right? Especially in Lagos. I don't know if you've read the report about how Igbos have been treated in Lagos. Many of those reports are utterly disgusting and disheartening. And there's a lot here that there is no time, but we could do a separate panel on ethnic relations and this particular election. It's one of the losers of this election. And I think one of the challenges that Tinubu, if he's sworn in as president, is going to face is how to begin to repair that, either by reaching out to elements of the obedience, by reaching out to Obi, by cultivating the Southeastern leadership. I understand that Ojikalu is trying to become Senate president. The extent to which is representative of mainstream Igbo now, I don't know. Maybe Soludo, I don't know. But there's something there that should worry you if you are a Nigerian in terms of relations between Igbo and other ethnic groups. And I said, let me say a couple more sentences about the Igbo. And if you should read my blog, I've dwelt extensively on the Igbo question. I'm going to say just two things. One, I think Nigeria cannot continue to pretend to be a true federalism with a trident of Hausa, Fulani, Igbo, and Yoruba, when one ethnic group is being permanently locked out of the mainstream. It's not true federalism. The Igbo case for the presidency makes itself. It's morally unimpeachable, it's sound, and I totally understand. If I were an Igbo, I would be rooting for Peter Obi, right? I would be rooting for him on an ethnic basis. The ethnic argument is not necessarily a liberal argument. It depends on how you mobilize it. But the point, and I've made this in my blog, that every Igbo has a right to think, and I'm borrowing something that you've heard before, it is our turn, right? It's a very powerful argument that I wish that they had made. Obi couldn't make it for obvious reasons because that would have unraveled his campaign. And he faced a very difficult situation, which I thought he handled excellently well. But the Igbos have been shafted, they've been held, given the short end of the stick. And I think that's one of the reasons why there's so much passion around the candidacy of Obi. I can say more about that. Two more losers, and then I'll keep quiet. The PDP. The PDP started as a single party. It is now at least four. There is the rump of the party around Abubakar Atiku. There's NMPP that Kwankwaso is not going to let go of because he still wants to do a deal. There is the part of the PDP that has now merged with Labour Party in a very classic marriage of convenience, under Obi. And then there is the G5, right? The governors of those 5 states who held out and who said, look, we're not going to do a deal because Atiku broke that, that entente, that understanding that meant that power should have been, have rotated to the south. The final loser in all of this, please read my piece, the Lagos, New York, London echo chamber. The Western media is a loser in all of this. For not doing its homework, yet again, for putting enthusiasm for a particular candidate, Obi, ahead of the reality on the ground, for worshiping at the altar of polling, for willfully locking itself in an echo chamber, and for its very perverse obstinacy in the face of contrary facts. So those are my, preliminary remarks. I'm willing to take questions. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Chichi, you had a follow-up as well.
Right. You and I disagree on INEC as the winner.
Okay.
Right? Because currently across the country, INEC is one of the more disliked institutions. And I do understand where you're coming from. But when we're talking about winners, and again, like you said, perhaps, 4 years down the line or the next electoral cycle, these, BVAS and institutions and the way it's meant to work would actually work. But it clearly did not work this time. And so what that did is a delegitimation of INEC as a neutral institution. And there's nothing worse in democracy, particularly within the context of contested elections, to create a perception, right? Because it's all about perceptions, that INEC is not neutral. So I think INEC is one of the losers. I agree with the other. Obi lost, but clearly won. Tinubu won, but clearly lost. But I think the question is, what will the Obi team do with this victory? And so far, there's no indication really, or there's no data that they're managing that victory well. It would seem as though they're beginning to squander that victory on the altar of ethnicity. I also disagree with you a little bit on saying that ethnic relations is the loser, perhaps in Lagos State. But Obi could not have won 6.1 million votes, based on ethnic votes alone. But I think part of this Obi movement is its ability to cross the fault lines, right? Particularly galvanizing the anti-government sentiments of the youth, right? And so if you're saying that it's Christianity or it's religion and not ethnicity, perhaps we can discuss that. But we also know that, before now, even the ethnic Christian voting has not aligned so perfectly as he aligned in this, in this round for the Obi movement. I think I also agree with you that state politics is one, subnational politics is here by far one of the biggest winners of this. Because it's become very clear that with these gubernatorial elections, that politics is clearly local and personal. Because part of what we had been looking at is that there will be a proxy voting, right? So that all the LP candidates, particularly across the East, will emerge winners, right? We're thinking Edoga in Enugu State will be, we're thinking Plateau State, right? But clearly none of those happened. people, even with Obi, tweeting, go out and vote these candidates, go out and vote these people. Clearly, I mean, in Plateau State, it was 60,000 votes, right? So clearly that did not happen. And that brings me to another fundamental question. When we talk about Obi as the winner, is it really Obi the person, or is it Obi the structure? As in a aggregation, right, of particular interests that have not sailed to the top so far since 1999. I would, argue that it's more Obi the structure, as in the anti-government sentiments, as the angst that has been accumulating, from 2007, the first SAIS movement, and then the recent one, and now, rather than Obi the individual. And so then the counterfactual, which we cannot prove, is if this had been another individual emerging from the Southeast, would we have seen the same move, the same energy, right, around this? And I agree with you clearly that it's the Igbo's exclusion from politics that has galvanized this. Again, which proves my point that ethnic relations is one of the winners, because across this, the public sphere, what we've seen is, people from the Yoruba ethnic group, people from the Hausa ethnic group saying it is the turn of the Igbos. This is clearly ridiculous at this point, right? So again, one, clearly Obi is a winner but lost, but are we talking Obi the individual, or are we talking Obi the structure? If Soludo, instead of Obi, had been the candidate, in fact, I think, and this might be sacrilegious, maybe I should just not say it, so I can still go back home. No, I need to go. I need to go back home.
If it was Soludo,
we'll have that discussion. We'll have that discussion. And by the way, we can easily prove that because we know that Soludo will contest. So, we'll prove that in 8 years. Okay. And so that's leading me to, again, my fundamental question. What do we do with this Obi victory? Because that's clearly the question for governance. If the Obi, the LP manages to transform itself into a credible, buoyant opposition party, then we'll start having institutions in Nigeria, right? Institutions that actually work. But if it becomes another moribund, so to speak, opposition party, then we'll go back to status quo. What does the LP need to do to transform itself into a credible opposition party? I think that's really the question.
Mm-hmm. So I'll jump in also with a couple of comments. This has been a very, again, thorough, provocative, thoughtful exchange. And we're trying to parse, all of us, the sort of balance of what we've been seeing. Obviously, we've been seeing a lot of negatives, a lot of some violence, some uncertainty, problems of just basic electoral administration, a lot of dissatisfaction and restiveness among various constituencies, and again, against this background of deep dissatisfaction with governance. Ebenezer is absolutely right. The polls, and the polling in general, not just in the United States, but in Nigeria, came off very poorly. On the other hand, there are some things we can say from the polling which speaks to the underlying attitude of voters about the political establishment, about their governance, and so forth. And what we have seen that seems to be fairly reliable is that there was very low turnout, surprisingly low turnout, particularly given that there were these enthusiastic crowds on the streets, and the Lagos, London, New York bubble said, "Oh my goodness, look at all of this." But we've seen that before also in American politics. There are some politicians who shall remain unnamed, who get big enthusiastic crowds everywhere. And they say, see, Biden can't get those crowds, but that doesn't necessarily translate into votes. So the point being here that, yes, there was a lot of enthusiasm, but there's good evidence that people didn't show up. Now, it could be because of disaffection. It could also be because of just the logistical and circumstantial factors that Ebenezer cited. There was a widespread endemic cash shortage because of the conversion of the currency at the last minute, weeks before a couple of months before the election. That also translated into a fuel shortage because people couldn't buy fuel. So people couldn't get to the polls, and people couldn't pay for basic expenses of transportation and other logistics, water bottles, whatever, around staging the elections. So there was very low turnout, probably no more than 27%, possibly no more than 27%, certainly no more than a third. We can have a conversation about whether INEC overperformed expectations or is a deficient institution, but I think one fact that comes out of this is that there's a lot of mistrust of INEC, that it's a kind of a Rorschach. People have different opinions about INEC. The failure to electronically transmit the results from the polling stations on election day, on the presidential election, was a fundamental blow to confidence in INEC. Regardless of whether they got it right the next day, and regardless of whether we think or know that the results were accurate. So it was a fundamental problem. A couple of people in the room will remember this, but early in Nigeria's post-independence existence, a development economist wrote a book called Planning Without Facts, which is about development planning in Nigeria and what you do when you don't have a lot of data. And I think what we've seen in the Fourth Republic is elections without facts. You try to do forensics, you try to figure out what the underlying alliances and moods were, and then you look at the results, and it's a little bit of a forensic exercise, and it's a little bit of guesswork. And the problem, I think, fundamentally, was that INEC's performance in this cycle didn't remove that sense of doubt and skepticism. At the same time, what Ebenezer says is absolutely correct. I mean, in a country of deficient institutions and no power supply and other fundamental problems, the fact that they were able to carry off the elections 2 cycles, the way they were do a planned postponement of the state elections, the fact that we got results which are likely to withstand judicial challenge. By the way, the Supreme Court in Nigeria will not rule on 2 things. 1 is Sharia law, 2 is the presidential elections. They will always punt, and so it's not an act of judiciary. It's certainly not the Kenyan judiciary. And the other element, speaking about a Pyrrhic victory, is just let's keep in mind, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, fewer than 10 million votes in a country of 220 million people and probably 100 million voters or 110 million voters, give or take. 10 million votes, that is well short of any, by any stretch of the imagination, a mandate. That is it's a midterm election result for a mayoral candidate in Washington, D.C. when you get very low turnout and kind of a foregone conclusion in that situation. The final element that I think I'll pick up on, and both of my colleagues have spoken about that, is the fundamental, I think a fundamental problem in the Fourth Republic has been that it was founded upon an exclusionary bargain. And there is not a party infrastructure that can create pathways of inclusion for this polarized and very diverse country. And we're seeing that leak out in violence and the escalating scale and scope of violence around Nigeria. It's not one fault line, it's not one vector, but it is a an indication of deep dissatisfaction with people's, with central governance, with the economy, and with the delivery of public goods, and with pathways to voice by various groups. I'll stop there, and maybe what we should do is just open it up. Yeah, please. And please identify yourself. Welcome.
But having said that, I really think that what we are actually the symptom of the country's value. I really think that this is not going to be the case. We can keep doing this forever and ever. As ethnic issues, colonial issues, religion, cultural, all kinds of things, but it's very difficult to understand the passion, emotions beneath all this problem. Until, I believe, I'm one to believe that once democracy crosses down, it will be very conceptualized. In America, under the Act of Confederation, ran up against foreign states, what did they do? They could have told me some of them, solve that problem. It's been challenged. And people are still finding ways to make it. Nigerian democracy has not been real. Has been created in such a way that it works for some people, doesn't work for them. There's a state capture there. And this is the result of it. So it's not going to work. I feel it fair. Yoruba Pan cultural organization says, let's not have elections. Let's have a discussion. Fix the rules before we do it. And I really strongly believe that you have to reimagine Nigeria. There are many examples to follow. Some of it can come from the United States. Some of it might be the Swiss model, European model. There's always in a multi-ethnic, multi-religion, cannot centralize the system. Expect that it's going to work very well. Nigerians want to be together, but they don't want to implant the system to make the country. And that is the problem. This election is a symptom.
Okay.
The religious issue, symptom, all these are symptoms. So we need to go to the root of that problem.
Thank you. And we'll.
To comment on it.
Okay. Thank you. I mean, we'll certainly address that. Other questions? Yeah, Lawrence.
Lawrence Freeman, I've been involved in Nigeria. So I've followed things closely. The issue that you just brought up at the end, you had a charity Chiedo is 1/3 of the legislature, which is 1/3 of people voted for the legislature. You got 1/3 of that. And they back less than 10% now. How can you have, what is Chiedo's mandate? Was maybe 5%, maybe 5%, 720 million people voting and taking over the helm of office at the total crisis. I'm trying to other after 8 years of Buhari, who I like, but how does he move forward in solving crisis? I'm not an expert on what little I've seen of his presentation. I have to be less enthusiastic. Policies are there to deal with this fear of open crisis. 5%, and will he remain? I mean, is there going to be challenges in terms of control, demonstrations, regime change operations against Tinubu, given his key mandate for the country and institutions? Second of all, in terms of INEC, what is your impression, going back to the 2015 election data, I was in Nigeria. We saw Chiedo do a tremendous job having to go come in, publicly on TV. I consider that a great. Has it not improved?
Jaga.
Has it not improved over that, or now is it setback? Not. I thought that was a high point.
Okay, so that question. Third, yeah, please. Yeah. Please, and then we'll answer. Yeah.
The first question is, what are we to expect of political parties crystallizing ideology? Reason for this question, parties, and now having similarities that relate to power for power political. Does the Labour Party allow forcing parties now to political forces process? And the second question is, if Tinubu is elected president, do we expect parties different, especially in the context and it's quite minimal in terms of
Okay, so questions about Tinubu's mandate and possible forward path, questions about the Labour Party going forward and what the party system might look like, a question about INEC's relative performance over time, and a more fundamental question about the structure of Nigeria and democratic institutions. So, Chichi, you can start with any or any of those.
Yeah, just brief lines and then. So I think in terms of Tinubu's mandate, I think we might be putting square holes in round pegs in square holes if we're looking at, the votes won as against the population, right? We had about 81, 82 registered voters, out of which we had 24 people cast their votes, that were counted. So that's not necessarily I think those ratios differ, but fundamentally the case is that this is democracy, and this is the way democracy works, right? Democracy is flawed. It could be the tyranny of the majority, it could be the tyranny of the minority, whatever it is. Tinubu won. I think we need to establish that. While the political parties, while the opposition parties go to court, as they should, which strengthens our democracy, they should go to court. But we also have to just fundamentally bear in mind and affirm the fact that Tinubu won the election, going by the votes as against what democracy is. Now, what the question is, then going back to your question, is what does that mean, right? What kind of a mandate is that, or what should we expect from Tinubu? Now, if we go back to history, at least in the history of Nigerian government, also across the world, that's part of also the narrative around Buhari, around Biden, is that he's lived, like he's an elderly gentleman, right? And so that there are issues of legacies, right? And that's the same thing, perspective around Tinubu is that at this point he's more concerned about issues of legacy, one. Two, he's starting from a really, really low expectation level. And so the idea is that he can only go forward, move forward from here. I'll stop there.
Ebenezer.
There will be no regime change in the way you have sort of hinted at it. I totally reject that. There's the long durée. The United States has been at it since 1776. It's gone up, down. This country remains a model. It continues to be a model. We don't because there is a low turnout in an American election or because an election is contested, we don't say there should be regime change. There will be no regime change in the way you brought it up in Nigeria. I'm sorry, I have to speak strongly against that. A couple of questions about mandates. So, you can't, as Chichi just said, you can, as they say in soccer or football, you only beat the team in front of you. A particular number of people registered of the election, particular percentage voted. You can't win more than the number of people who voted. The question is not whether there's a mandate. The question is, how do we get more people to vote in Nigerian elections? And you see, we have to come back to what I said earlier. There's a reason why in this particular election, the numbers were so depressed. If I was in Nigeria, I would not have gone out. I spoke to my parents, my 88-year-old dad, 76-year-old mom. Are you voting? They said, no. Are you out of your mind? Can't you go out? So let's keep that in mind. There's no money in circulation. People were afraid for their lives, right? It was in that particular context that the election took place. Now, if you compare it with numbers from previous elections, you essentially see that the turnout then becomes high because of the passion that people had for some of the candidates. So keep that in mind. Look, we shouldn't give up on a country on the basis of just one electoral cycle. We can't just say we give up on Nigerian democracy simply because this particular election was not perfect. If we're in it for the long run, if we're trying to build solid foundations that are going to be there for the next 100 years, we have to think differently about how we view these things. The other thing is ideology, which I think is a very interesting question. And it takes me back to what Chichi was asking earlier. Maybe it's time for me to address that. So the fundamental distinction between Labour Party and the obedient, right? The obedient / Obi took over the Labour Party. Like all marriages of convenience, you sign on the dotted line in the dark, and then you come out in the light, oh, what did we just sign? And I think it would have been very interesting if Obi had actually won the election, in which case the contradictions between Obi, a successful businessman and entrepreneur, being the standard bearer of an explicitly socialist political party, that contradiction would have been very interesting, to see where we're going to be denied the opportunity and what we'll continue to see. And where I'm hoping that the rump of obedience will go is to ideologize politics. One of the unfortunate effect of what has happened to the Labour, not the Labour Party, Labour, trade unions, civil society, and all of that, is that ideological component of politics has been lost. So if you look at APC, PDP, Labour Party, there's really no distinction, among the three of them. The guy who won on the platform of the Labour Party in Abia State is a member of the PDP, right? What is he bringing to the Labour Party that makes him ideologically unique? I don't see it. So there are problems there that, and this goes back to what you were saying. There are fundamental problems that can't be resolved in an electoral cycle. Nigeria's problems, look beyond Tinubu. If you were to construct something and put Tinubu, Atiku, and Obi as president running the country, there are problems that you can't solve in Nigeria for the next 25 years, right? Because those problems are not to do with the government. They have to do with the fundamental structure of the society. They have to do with the normative collapse that you have in every section of segment of the society. They have to do with the monocultural character of the economy. These are problems that you don't solve within the tenure of an administration, even if you are talking about 2 tenures. So all these problems are there.
If I may just add, right? I'm sorry. So I know that the outlook is pessimistic, but I think we might also be overstating the pessimism. Right. The political structure, the pacts that created Nigeria is fundamentally flawed. But I am not sure that across, maybe perhaps outside of the Nordic countries, I think you have fundamentally flawed constitutions across the world. And countries have gone on to do well, right? So at times I feel like, the political elites, for various reasons, instrumentalize this idea of a fundamentally flawed constitution to continue to drive the dysfunction. I come from the place that, the pact, though fundamentally strong, and perhaps the more reason why it should do well is because of the ideological, the ideological gap in politics. So when we're talking about bread and butter, it presents even more opportunity and more agenda for the country to do well. As opposed if we have, political gridlocks from political ideologies. And I do agree that, our parties across the world have, grown on the basis of ideology. But again, perhaps Dalloz and Chabal and Dalloz have something here. Just the one thing I agree with them, right, is the fact that we have to give grace to African democracies to the extent that these are just 60-old constitutions. And we're comparing them with, 250-year-old constitutions and three. I would say that, giving the context that the future is female.
Thank you. Okay, a couple of points, and then we'll see if there are any final questions, and then we can wind up. But so with the evolution of INEC, so JAGA made some really fundamental reforms. 2011 was, really a tipping point in terms of the conduct of elections in Nigeria. And even then, JAGA's expectations, his ambitions or the way he was setting expectations was modest. He consistently said, the elections will not be perfect. I had the opportunity to tell him, you delivered, and which he appreciated, But he, beneath that, obviously he made, given the fiasco and massive fraud and massive dysfunction of 2007, he set the electoral system since 2011 on a path that is at least minimally functional. And one of the things that was done in INEC during 2011 to 2015 was to institutionalize the practice of recording and monitoring results by election observers, election agents, and average voters at each polling station. People were allowed and encouraged to stick around. Now you have almost 100% cell phone penetration across the country, so people can get photos of the polling sheets. And so it's created a culture, really, I think we can say, of sort of citizen engagement. And even I've seen this, personally, different election rounds, of even a kind of much more relaxed attitude by security agents and at many polling stations. Okay, everybody's on top of this, everybody's got an eye out, we know our business, we're doing the job. So I've seen that work in some contexts. Obviously, it doesn't work everywhere. However, having said that, these changes in both culture and capacity were developed and were institutionalized, but there's a lot of contingency. And so if you don't have fuel, and if you don't have cash, and if you don't have electricity, and if you're rolling out new technology that's not working, and if the federal government is not releasing funds in a timely way so that INEC can staff up and get its infrastructure and its plans in place, then obviously they're going to be compromised. And that's what we saw this time. I mean, I don't think, in my estimation, the current leadership of INEC may not have the same methodical and reformist intent that JAGA and his team had. But I don't think that they're fully captured by the parties or by the state. I think they're well-intentioned, and I think they're operating under great constraints. So I think that's what we saw play out in this election. The other question is, what can Tinubu do? What's his presidency going to be like? I'll make a statement, which is, you know, I want to go back to Nigeria someday too, but, you know, we'll see. I'll say, I mean, we've had 3 failed presidential administrations, or 3 terms in a row. Good luck, Jonathan, PDP. So it's not a partisan statement. And 2, Buhari. They were utter failures in terms, and you can see the performance on the ground in terms of poverty, in terms of economic performance, in terms of security, in terms of national accommodation. Take your pick. And you can attribute that to various things, including political capture and the resilience of patronage networks within the dominant or the leading parties. You can attribute it to weakness in individual leadership qualities. But the point being that under Obasanjo, for all the flaws in that presidency as well, there was at least some decisive leadership, and in particular, some ability to turn to technocratic groups at pivotal moments in the administration. And so I focus a lot when I look at these things. My question is often, where are the technocrats? Is there a technocratic group that's being given some opportunity, some mandate, some authority to make changes, and given some political space to do it? Obasanjo did that for a brief window from 2003 to 2006. It wasn't sustained, and then it was scuttled by subsequent administrations. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala returned as finance minister, but under a totally different political compact during Goodluck. Those of us who had watched Buhari over the years hoped in scenario building in 2015 that he might take some initiative on national security and anti-corruption, and then defer to the southwestern wing of his party where there was clear expertise on the economy. He did none of those things. And so now for Tinubu, there is an opportunity to again turn to some technocratic groups. The most natural catchment area would be in his own backyard of Lagos, although in previous administrations, Easterners showed a high level of technocratic competence and ability. So if Tinubu can cobble together a leadership team and build some technocratic capability, if he has either the interest or the ability to do so, then I think you could see a scenario where small mandate, but big changes. And it wouldn't be the only time in history that people came in with low expectations and then overperformed because they had a vision, or at least they were able to pull together a team. That's aspirational, it's hopeful, it's one scenario. If, on the other hand, we see a continuation of the status quo, then there'll be, you know, a shift in the ethnic character of the clientelist networks within APC. There'll be more state capture, there'll be more power sharing, provisional tactical power sharing, and sharing of spoils, and we'll continue to see the secular trends and the structural problems that Ebenezer referenced, which exert, you know, these negative forces on Nigeria's nationhood. On the question of the fundamental problem of Nigeria, I couldn't agree more. I think most of us agree with Professor Patrick that these are indeed fundamental historical and structural issues. Again, thinking about agency, I always turn to the example of countries like Indonesia after their democratic transition. First of all, they went from centralism to a kind of federal arrangement. They decentralized government structure. Second of all, they have a yearly convocation which oversees constitutional amendments. There's been virtually no amendment of Nigeria's constitution, which was handed down by, you know, scribbled on by Abacha, handed down by the military in 1999. It's a flawed document. This is where the calls for true federalism issue from both the Southwest and the Southeast, and the South-South as well. And so without, I mean, I agree with Chichi that yes, this is instrumentalized. Yes, people make you know, sort of claims against it. But also there are fundamental issues that could be dealt with in some institutional format. You have a constitutional amendment structure in Nigeria. You could convene some kind of a forum that would address those problems, bring up some dialogue, and give people some kind of new foundation. And instead, what we've seen is a compact and elite cartel where you have a somewhat porous and shifting array of politicians and business people which are sharing rents from the petrostate. And notwithstanding the fact that there's a bigger private sector and there's structural change in the Nigerian economy, that's the fundamental political context and compact, and it hasn't changed. Chichi, you had a
No,
follow-up.
so I was going to,
Yeah, and then we'll get to you. And it's like, sorry, I see you, Noel. Yeah.
real quick, what kind of a president should we expect in Tinubu? So I think perhaps we should look at history. Tinubu, to a big extent, a huge extent, is the reason Lagos State is Lagos State, right? One, giving the miracle he did, so to speak, with the northern constituency. It's very clear that he's a deal maker, that he is a strategist, and that he's good at making alliances. If all these hold true, these are some of the skill sets required of a politician, and one that would do well in a context, in a contested, fractured institution, state like Nigeria, right? So the expectation is that, one, he should be able to cut deals across the fault lines. Two, certainly, Tinubu, given history, against the narratives out in the public, in the private social media, Tinubu has done well with the Igbo entrepreneurial group. And so the expectation is that he will do that. If he does that, that is what Nigeria needs, is to establish these manufacturing hubs, right? Which we know that the Igbo does well, which really is what the Igbo want to do, right? They want a place, a state that, that harnesses their entrepreneurial drive and a part of the political cake. That's all the Igbo wants, and I think Tinubu understands that. Third is that, just like Peter said, Tinubu understands the importance of technocrats. If he has forgotten, giving some of the people we see in his cabinet, we think he's going to do that. But I think the most critical issue at this point is Tinubu's health. And that has swirled around who his running mate is, Shettima. And so that is where the rubber meets the road, is will Tinubu be able to actually govern? If Tinubu governs, I think we should expect some kind of relief for Nigerians. Now, if not, and I don't know what not means, right? Well, I don't know.
Yeah. So let's take a quick question, and if there's another one, 2 quick questions, and then we'll do 2 quick answers probably. Go ahead, Noel, I think, or no? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you so much.
It was hiding.
I have to hide myself. Okay, so so I have like many things going on in my mind. The first is thank you so much for the discussion. I've enjoyed it. Great 1 hour, 20 minutes of my time today. But one thing I noted because I looked at the court document, the first ground for the petition is the fact that Tinubu is not even eligible because of this. So it's really, if our judiciary is not, what's the word? It's not activist, right? But at the same time, it's about, I am going to be, I'm curious about what you think would happen if the court doesn't hold that he isn't eligible based on that one ground, apart from the fact that, their electoral, during the elections, there were inconsistencies and whatnot. Apart from that single ground, I am concerned that it will pull some weight. And I don't know what you guys think. I would like to know. And then secondly is, what do you think is, like, in a sentence, I know we've said many things, but what has really changed about, what's the word now? There are many words to use, but I'm just going to say political atmosphere in Nigeria. What has changed? What is the key thing that has changed, right? I know there is, like, youth getting, they've woken up, right? They're all woke now, thinking about what things could change and, how we're going to select our leaders and all of that. But I'm curious about what you think has changed and how that's going to, how you see that changing or transforming or morphing in the future. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Noelle?
I want to echo Michelle's sentiments and say thank you so much, all of you, for taking the time to have this discussion. It's very timely, and as someone just entering the world of African affairs, it's a pivotal conversation as well. My question is more in regards to some of the judicial intervention conversations, but zooming out at large, the state of the judiciary in the Nigerian context specifically. I'm contemplating the state of judiciaries across different contexts in Africa, but it is interesting in this sort of post-electoral climate. A lot of conversation around Nigerian distrust of judicial process, a lot of distrust around different levels of Nigerian judicial courts and people leading the courts. What is it going to take in the decades to come, the years to come after an election like this, to not only handle this political dimension that we've been really drilling down on, but to also pair it with work in strengthening the judicial space, reestablishing that relationship of trust with the day-to-day Nigerian, looking for these judicial processes to be upheld and separate from the political atmosphere, I think that Michelle was hinting at in her question. I think that's a really key piece that I'm still thinking about and not sure how to wrap my head around. Thank you.
Okay, we'll respond very quickly. Ebenezer?
Just a couple of sentences in response to both questions. Thank you for your questions. Really appreciate it. So let me remind you again, don't take the judiciary in isolation. I understand your frustration, but go back to what I said. There's no electricity in Nigeria. There's an institution responsible for that, right? You've just expressed doubt about the way the election was organized, right? Law enforcement in Nigeria is a joke. I'm telling you everything you know, right? Have you been to Nigeria? Why would you expect the judiciary to be different, my sister? See what I'm saying? Everybody is not, look, you've left INEC now. All of a sudden, everybody wants INEC to be this one. It doesn't happen that way. The judiciary is corrupt. But it didn't start yesterday. It didn't start with this election. Everybody knows it. So I'll tell you. Look, how you fix it, you want an entire literature on that, I can give it to you. But you know where my hope comes from? Peter Obi himself, right? Look below the presidential elections. Look at state-level elections, House of Representatives. Look at the number of elections that have been overturned by the courts. Yeah. That's where hope is. Obi himself is a good example of that. Remember, he didn't become governor in the first instance. He had to go to court. He had to win a court battle. So there is hope there. But is the judiciary corrupt? Are you kidding me? But the Nigerian judiciary, what do you expect? It's not going to change under the tenure of a single president. Don't expect it. It's going to take a lot of work. Look, you can't isolate institutions, which is why I keep talking. When you look back, you're going to say, wow, INEC dealt with that and still managed to organize an election at all? Wow. kudos to INEC. I'm planning to bring Professor Mahmoud Yakubu here, so hopefully you'll be my mailing list, and then you'll be able to, he will be able to explain himself. What has changed? A lot. My sister, a lot. The obedient one. You can't see it now because you're for anger about Peter Obi. Once the dust settles, right, and you look at this election, you go like, did we actually achieve that? Right? The terms of engagement have changed. You've destroyed one of the most formidable political parties in Africa, the one that boasted that it was going to be in power for 1,000 years. Is out of the door. There are so many things that have been achieved. Let us build on those achievements. If we don't, we're going to lose the next election. And I worry that people are not focusing on the victories that they've achieved so that they can consolidate on those victories.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just follow up on that. If you had been given the proposition in 2011 that a dominant political party, which had consistently won elections and increased their majority, not only in the presidential election, but within the National Assembly and the control of governorships, in a petro state where you have centralized control over, revenues and rents, you would have said, well, the PDP is just going to carry that as a dominant party, carry that through as a dominant party indefinitely. And now it's gone, it's obliterated. Yeah. And so I think in terms, I would agree that what's happened is, Professor Nwankwor's observation, what's going to happen to the Labor Party and the third party tendency, is the question. But for the moment, we've seen in an election, they've turned a two-way election into a three-way election, highly competitive, 1 million votes separating the second and third candidates. The second and third candidates, well, I guess the third candidate won about at least 12 states. I mean, it really has shifted. It's created a new sense of possibility. 2015 created a new sense of possibility that you could have an electoral turnover in Nigeria, that the ruling party could be defeated and the losing candidate would concede. That created a new possibility, the first time in post-independence history, in Nigerian history. Now you have a new possibility that a third-party insurgency can succeed. So I think that's important. And on the courts, just to repeat that, I mean, there were 28 elected governors. There are 36 states in Nigeria. What happened to the other 8 states? They're off cycle because of judicial rulings in previous election cycles, as are many legislative races. And so the point being that the judiciary does function. It's not neutered. It's not massively, I mean, it's corrupt, but it's not just totally corrupted and dysfunctional. They exercise, sometimes they even rule against presidential preferences. So there is a degree of not only judicial capability and learned, weight and bearing, but also in judicial independence. Do people take money? Yes. Is there fiddling with appointments? Absolutely. It's not a standard, compared globally that you might hope for or against Nigerian ideals. But let's not just write them off either. I totally agree. Anyway, please, Chichi, last word,
just
2 minutes.
1 minute maybe.
Okay, 1 minute.
So, one, the not eligible thing, I'm actually surprised that that was part of the suit, right? Because now I'm thinking, and then the idea of, compelling APC to not be part of the second round, so what is the agenda here? Because clearly those are frivolous. The fact that that Tinubu is not eligible to contest the election, that means no Nigerian, Peter Obi himself, again, I'm trying not to be sacrilegious here, right? But if we look at, history, the Pandora Papers and all of that, then we start talking, right? So again, let's leave that alone because I want to go back to Nigeria. Secondly, the idea...
It's too late.
So I know I have ideas of what's going to happen and ideas of what should happen. is going to happen is not what should happen, going by the way things are going, right? So I think we're completely squandering this opportunity, going by what the LP party is doing. We don't have time. We can have those discussions another day. The state of the judiciary. I think the Nigerian judiciary is actually one of the better judiciaries across Africa, given history.
It's a stronger statement.
It's a very
Yeah,
strong
yeah,
judiciary.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, there is corruption. There is corruption in American judiciary. We see what is going on with the Trump inquiry and all of that, right? So, and that is not to say that we're going to see an activist. I completely agree with Peter. The Nigerian judiciary is not going to litigate on the Sharia. It's not going to litigate on presidential election. It might get to a point where it litigates on presidential election, but some of the variables has to change for it to do that. Currently, it's not going to do that. And I think I'm just going to leave it there.
Thanks so much. I think high energy, great insights, good exchange. Thanks, everybody.
Can she go back to Nigeria?
I think everybody can go back to Nigeria. They might even let me in.
Where are you going? Are you teaching today?
I have a meeting 2:30.
Okay. Oh,
Chi-
you're already
Chi-Chi.
late.
Yes.
Okay.
Chi-Chi's running the school. She does this and, sort of on the side, right?
This has been great, Peter.
This was fantastic. Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry, it's such a blur. I'm ABD. I've been doing, yeah, I'm pretty much done with interviews and my So I, oh, great, yeah, and so I was actually 2 months of orientation, language learning. You should hopefully get like plenty of specific training back. How academic to see how, no, I'm actually no, I left for field work, so now it's field work, and I'm just, yeah. That would be wonderful, yeah.
Oh, yeah, no. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, and so we have 2 months of training to learn and some language and then you can get better. Yeah. When did you arrive? And you're here for like a week? I got that.
Okay,
Absolutely. And then my number.
okay,
You can text me, you can email.
yeah, that'd be great. I'd love to talk to you more. Yeah, I appreciate that.
I'm looking forward to
Okay,
it.
sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know
I
if
will
about
send
it.
you in the next 1 hour.
Yeah. He said he could come today.
I told myself, hey, when you say about the media, the first thing I thank you. Yeah. And you guys, you go back to Nigeria?
No. I work at CFI. I live in DC. Yeah.
Unfortunately.
I don't know about the salaries. I know that before you met about 200. Yeah. I don't know if you're right. Yeah, what?
Yeah, I don't know what it's going to be like, but I mean, so, yes, he's going to be at the Hill on Thursday. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like people come into the office and that's needed.
No, I don't. I was going to give her one. But my email address is Obadare@CFR. Let me try the pen. Yes, sir. Can I steal your pen? Sure. Yeah, thank you. I am. 1 second. Sometimes I'm trying to say that's my email address.
Yeah, I posted certain things about some other African issues like CRC and I guess if people around
I don't. I can write my email. He has to because it's not his own. Another point I wanted to make is also the body of history. It's not just the president. It's going to be a human. Once you know that somebody will extreme. In that regard, to that extent, I think he will do his best. If only because of two, as Chichi said, the guy is so low. Just basic technocrats, a modicum of that, please.
Well, that's exactly.
Like basic security, like infrastructures for, like, I know, just keep things nice, things along. Let's have cash in the economy. Just like, I do hope that will continue what? No, I hope not. I once, yeah, I know. When you brought up Indonesia, I was hoping you would just go on and on.
Well, you know I could, but I'm not going to do that.
In my next book, I'm going to come back to your book because I think some of the things you said have been overlooked. And if Nigeria is going to be the next Indonesia,
well, it's, the prospect is still there.
Yeah.
Don't they do regional security? Rather than local security?
Regional, no, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Inconceivable.
I know. Yeah, I was recommending your book to someone that said, Nigeria and Indonesia started on the same path, multi-ethnic countries and all of that later this week. And since then, they've been adding different.
And you look at just little things that they did. I mean, they also inherited a crappy military design constitution in 1999. Because the liberalization, the democratization was almost simultaneous for both countries. And yeah, well, they did that too. But I mean, there's a lot of things. But just on the Constitution, two flawed constitutions handed down by the military. In one case, you had, first of all, a radical restructuring before the transition into a semi-federal system. Second, they have an expanded assembly every summer that looks at constitutional amendments. So, the Nigerian constitutional amendments have been used ad hoc around the election administration.
Yeah, that was good. Indonesian,
Well, that's
also majority Malaysian.
It's majority Muslims, 85% Muslim. And they've reduced poverty, they've reduced fertility, they've reduced population growth, they've accelerated economic.
That doesn't change. I mean, look at it. See, how do you notice? Surrounded by all the different countries in the world. You can't really yeah, sure. Yes, you can. But I also don't want us to. Like, the country is. I mean, somebody know. There are problems you can't solve in 8 years. No. Yeah, the trend. Yes.
Yeah, but you know, I mean,
education in the north.
I mean, there are these.
We are introducing to Tinubu. We have some good ideas.
He's always got good ideas.
Buhari rejected Obadare.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean,
I'm sorry, I had to say all very hard. We don't want to do change.
Lawrence is always talking about
Change. No. Look, has he lived under the military before? I have.
Well, he was asking more of an analytical question, a descriptive question, but he veers off into direction.
Like, I thought you meant, would it be a popular uprising to like
Exactly,
bring someone
and the
else?
answer is no. Not gonna happen. Neither desirable nor
We want
plausible.
institutions that we all agree are very valuable and want them to have those things. I mean, if you bypass the judiciary, what are you going to end up with? But if Nigeria starts giving if he has the capacity, maybe now we're telling other people to build their own economy.
I mean, you know, there's another really good book out, Yuan Han's How China Escaped the Poverty Trap. Yeah, it's about poverty. It's fantastic. And her point is similar to what I say, similar to what Dan Slater says about Malaysia and so forth. All of these stories, all of these, success stories, if you look, it's not like, oh, they built up institutions incrementally and they started and then they launched their high growth episode. They were in shambles in terms of, and so when when you're in shambles, you can get big gains for incremental changes very quickly just by giving some segment of capital. This is Stephen Haber did this in Mexico. And it was in civil war. And it was corrupt. And
If shambles is a precondition, Nigeria's okay.
It is the one, and he is going to
My email address.
That's great. I think you know my colleague Chad Weinberg.
so
I'm at SAIS.
I think I've heard of it.
Yeah, I think you can speak.
Obadare.
I've been there. I've been there a bunch of times, but not.
I like the blog.
Oh, thank you so much. Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. At CFR. Yeah. Good to meet you, my friend.
Yeah, Chris.
Thank you. And I hope that was useful.
Yeah, definitely.
It's good.
Okay, I have to go.
Okay.
Thank you.
What a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
I wanna get
Happy
together.
birthday. I didn't know you invited Yoruba people here.
Oh, I did. He's a Hausa.
He's Igbo.
I'm sort of the Igbo. I'll ping you, but we'll make time to get together. I wanna have a sit down for lunch and just talk.
Oh, please send me an email. Yeah, let's do it. Oh, in the text. Okay. Okay. Send me an email. I'll be expecting your text. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Joy. This is fantastic.
You're welcome. Glad it worked out.
So, you still want to, I'm not, oh, yeah, send me an email. I need to talk. Can I see you for
Yeah, of course.
we need to go beyond our.
Okay, yeah,
And then we need to talk.
Okay, okay, I'll email you.
I need to say some of the books.
Got you, I got you.
Thank you.
Of course.
Stay out of trouble.
I'll do my best.
Right, exactly. I'm trying to do the Paris exchange at SAIS school in Africa, come back for last semester DC.
Okay, I'm from Nigeria.